Hi, Fools, everyone on Motley Fool Live. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Margaret, and I work on our marketing here at The Fool. We have a super exciting guest today. We have Alex Lieberman from Morning Brew, co-founder of this business newsletter, almost 6 years old, over 2 million
Right around there.
subscribers. We're super excited to have you today. I'm especially excited because actually our partnership with Morning Brew is part of my team's work. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and thanks for the introduction. It's been a fun 5.5 years since starting this when I was a senior in college and my co-founder Austin was a sophomore in college, and also we're just super pumped to be partners of the Fool for a number of years now. I think when I think about some of our partnerships that have evolved in a really meaningful way and an exciting way. I think entirely about the Fool, from like in the early days, individual newsletter placements to tell the Fool story, all the way now to like a way more holistic thing as Morning Brew becomes a media brand and not just a newsletter company. So I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really exciting partnership for our team. I think we've been partners for a little bit over a year in the newsletter space, and it really has grown to like such a dynamic partnership, and really a content partnership and not just advertising. But
100%.
to kick things off today, for anyone like watching Motley Fool Live who might not yet be a subscriber, give us the quick rundown of what is Morning Brew.
Yeah, for sure. So Morning Brew's goal at the highest level is to empower the modern business leader with engaging and accessible content. My more irreverent, shorter answer is like business news and business content isn't sexy, or at least it hasn't been sexy in the ways that traditional media brands have talked about the business world. And our goal is to make it sexy and enjoyable for an entire generation of people that are going to run companies and run countries in the next 5 to 10 years. And to us, like the big insight in starting this business was when we were in college. We would ask students when prepping them for job interviews, how do you keep up with the business world? And every student would say something along the lines of, I read the Wall Street Journal and I read it because I feel like I have to, because it's a prerequisite. They go on and on. And at some point we were like, this is crazy. These kids are working their off to have careers in business. They're literally going to spend the ages of like 20 to 60 plus, so 40 years, 50% of your life for those 40 years working in business. Like they deserve to have content that they love and that motivates them. And so that was the beginning insight. The OG product of Morning Brew is a product that we still have today that is our marquee product. It's our daily newsletter sent out 6 days a week to 2.5 million people, a million unique opens a day. I think it makes it the largest daily newsletter in the country, or second largest. And the way that we've grown the business since launching the newsletter in 2015 is basically with this obsession about a very specific type of person we call the modern business leader, this intellectually curious, deeply aspirational and career-oriented millennial professional. And so if you track the progression of Morning Brew and all of the products that we've launched, it's always about how can we further serve that psychographic. And so now Morning Brew has 7 products across B2B and B2C. We have several newsletters. So on the B2B side, we have Marketing Brew for marketing professionals, Retail Brew for retail professionals, Emerging Tech Brew for emerging technology professionals. On the B2C side, we have our daily newsletter. We have Sidekick, which is our most recent product. It's a lifestyle newsletter because professionals also have lives. It's this crazy concept. Like we also care about that outside of work. And so the point of that product is to serve like the life of business professionals. We have our podcast, Business Casual, which is an interview podcast with the biggest names in the business world, gets 150,000 downloads a week. And over 2021, what you're going to see is Morning Brew truly becoming a media brand and not just a newsletter company, where we start really placing bets in things like multimedia, video and audio shows, actually building out a website that isn't just a landing page that you put your email address in. So we're super excited about it.
That's really exciting. A lot of cool growth coming in 2021 for you guys. And I think like when I think about what stood out to me about Morning Brew, like as I've learned about it over the years, is like that insane, crazy fast growth. And I personally think like one of the key parts of that when I look at it as a consumer of Morning Brew is like this robust referral program. Can you share a little bit about the referral program and like how did that come to be? What was that inspired by? And what role has that played in the growth of the subscriber base?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk about the referral program, and then I'll talk about this concept that I call the balloon effect, which is how I think a lot of companies grow, the type of trajectory in which a lot of companies grow. So the referral program, it's been probably our most important lever that we pull to grow. It Other than our college ambassador program when we first started, our referral program was like the first thing that we launched to get the flywheel going of people who read Morning Brew and feel passionate about it, sharing with other people. And so, the high level is that more than 300,000 of Morning Brew's subscribers, so obviously more than 10% of our subscribers, have gotten at least one referral. And when you think about that, it's pretty crazy because like if I wasn't running a media business and specifically a newsletter business, I would never be the person to read a newsletter, get to the bottom, see a referral link, say, oh, I'm going to earn a hat or a bottle opener with that referral link, go share that with my friends, get them to sign up to earn this stuff. Like that was never going to be my behavior. And so the fact that 300,000 people have done that is pretty remarkable. And the referral program still continues to be a massive driver because it makes every new subscriber worth more than just one subscriber. And the way, just to give kind of insight into it, at specific referral checkpoints. So when you get people in your network to sign up for Morning Brew through your link, you earn rewards. So you can earn anything from our Sunday edition of the newsletter, which is called Light Roast, to stickers, to a brew mug, to a brew crew neck, which we call a brew neck. And basically our view was let's come up with rewards that do two things. One, reward our most passionate readers who are going to want to wear the brew on their bodies as like kind of like a sign of being a VIP in the club. And then the second thing is come up with rewards that don't cost a lot but mean a lot to people. So how can we acquire new subscribers not super expensively, but reward with things that mean a lot to people? And so I'll give you an example like Light Roast, which is our Sunday edition of the brew. The rewards our best readers with great content, but the cost of producing Light Roast obviously isn't super high. It's a writer's worth of time over a year. Same thing with a mug. Like people think mugs are expensive. I think our mugs cost like 25 cents a mug. When you back into the cost of acquiring new subscribers by giving away mugs, it's very low. So the referral program has been great for us. And the last thing I'll say is this idea of the balloon effect, which I've written about, is I think Morning Brew has experienced this. I think that even in some ways, it's something that the Fool has experienced over the Fool's history. When I think about like famous YouTubers like Mr. Beast or David Dobrik, like the way that the balloon effect works is a company is relentlessly focused on creating great product and getting customers organically for a long period of time. So let's say a business has been around for 10 years. Basically, the idea of the balloon effect is for 8 of those years, the business isn't getting a lot of recognition. It isn't that massive yet. It's growing gradually and linearly, but it hasn't exploded yet. And almost like this process of filling up a water balloon in the sink, when you're holding the faucet open, that's all the work you need to do to fill up the balloon. You never know when the balloon's going to pop, but when it does pop, you clearly know when it pops. Water goes everywhere. And I think there's this concept of there's a tipping point in which you've produced enough great product, enough people are talking about you through word of mouth, that something clicks, something pops, and all of a sudden the growth in your business is exponential. And I think when we look at Morning Brew, that has been the last year and a half for us. And before that point, for 3.5 or 4 years prior to that, it was very much like no one knew us. We were creating a nice business and it exploded into a significantly larger business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it definitely seems like even that like balloon effect and the referral program in and of itself, like took Morning Brew, in my opinion, from like maybe a 5-minute read in your daily inbox every morning to like a part of your life and a part of like your overall experience of consuming content on the internet. And I think you touched on something a little bit earlier that's really interesting, and something that we've taken up here as well, which is that business news and financial content has like not always historically had the reputation of being super user friendly. It's thought to have a lot of jargon and maybe being like less accessible to the everyday person. And you know that we at the Fool have taken on like the approach of making everything as we say, capital F foolish and fun and informative as possible. And I think Morning Brew really does that. And how do you guys approach taking business news, like you said, traditionally not the most exciting piece of content in the inbox every morning, and making it this kind of exciting, easily consumable, user-friendly experience?
Yeah, totally. So I would say the first is having a team that truly buys into that concept, that buys into that like business is actually fascinating. Like I'm always fascinated by the idea of every day I learn about a new business that is just so interesting, and no one has effectively told the story of that business. So I'll give you an example, like Oatly, the oat milk company. Like Oatly's story is fascinating, and not enough people know the story. The fact that it's been around since 1999, it was started in a research institute in Sweden. It was a tiny business literally until 2014, and now it's a $2 billion company because a new CEO came in, rebranded the company, focused on marketing through boutique coffee shops first and then growing out of that. And like, to me, it's like that story and that journey just isn't talked about enough, but everyone will find it fascinating. Um, so the first is just like having people on our team that are nerds like me and like Austin and truly find it interesting, just the stories of businesses. I think the second thing is the voice that we deploy at the business. Like, we have been so relentlessly focused on developing a very specific voice and codifying that voice, where literally we have documents almost like the Coca-Cola secret recipe that talk through like who the brew, if Morning Brew was a person, who that person is. We've literally codified like how old this person is, where they live, the type of cocktails they like, how many days a week they go out, whether they like TED Talks more than reading 10Ks, and like in excruciating detail, we've written the profile of this fake person, because I think it allows our writers to truly understand what is the persona that they're embodying when they write. And I think the other thing we've done a good job of is, as we've gone from one newsletter to several newsletters and podcasts, we've been really thoughtful about how do we port this tone into different parts of the business, but also recognize that people have individual and independent voices. So like our retail brew writer, our marketing brew writer, our emerging tech brew writer, all have different ways of writing and different voices than our daily newsletter writers. But there's a way to have different voices, but still have the same tone. It's like the fact that Alex, I'm one person, but the way that I'm communicating on this conversation right now versus, with my girlfriend 5 minutes from now versus when I'm in a board meeting with Business Insider, I'm the same person, but the way I communicate is different. And I think that's how we think about tone versus voice within our company.
Mm-hmm. And I think as you've kind of expanded beyond the newsletter business into other types of media, has there been a specific challenge, especially maybe even relating to podcasts, in keeping that brand consistent as you've grown outside of the newsletter space?
I think the hardest thing is, at least with podcasting. So our first podcast outside of newsletter, or sorry, our first product outside of newsletter is a podcast. And it's not that just taking your voice into podcasting is hard. Like, that's a given. It's going to be hard to port your voice in different ways. But I think it's the fact that, okay, it's an interview podcast. So 2 days a week, Kinsey Grant, who has her own voice, is interviewing a guest, whether it's Mark Cuban, Barbara Corcoran, Meg Whitman, Reed Hastings, etc., who has another voice. And I think when you just think about the dynamic of an interview podcast, 40 minutes, Kinsey's maybe spending 15% of the interview talking, and then 85% of it is the guest. And so I think this new layer that we didn't have to think about with newsletters that we have to think about now is, how do you find voices and guests that are on brand for Morning Brew's interview series? Because just because someone's a CEO or just because someone's a billionaire doesn't actually mean that they will evoke the tone of Morning Brew. And it's so important when they're spending 85% of the conversation being the one speaking.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something earlier that is kind of a good pivot to a topic I want to hit on, which is Insider. And like quite notably this past year, Insider came on board as a majority stakeholder over at Morning Brew. And I was hoping you could share a little bit with us about what that process has meant for the brand and the product suite.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like this answer always disappoints people, but like really nothing has changed. It's kind of boring, like in the sense that I'm sitting in the same office in my grandparents' apartment doing the same exact thing I was doing 6 months ago. Um, I think to most people on our team, they don't really, they haven't seen the impact yet. And what I mean by that is I think there are going to be ways for Insider and the Brew to partner where we can draft off of the resources of a, you know, billion-dollar company and then their owner who's a multi-billion-dollar company. But we're in early days of the partnership, so I don't think people have seen that yet. Where I think things have changed are honestly just more structure, which maybe again, this is just like me being nerdy, but as a first time founder, as someone who I'm naturally creative, who naturally has like 50 thoughts going on at once, to I think be forced into a little bit more structure, I think it is important for me to mature as a leader. So what I mean by that is like we do quarterly board meetings now. We have to present to the board, which includes Austin, my co-founder, and myself, folks from Business Insider. And we meet with them bi-weekly as well. And I think that forces Austin and I to just be a little bit more structured in our thinking and also be more forward thinking in how we plan not just the next 6 months for the business, but the next year, 3 years, and 5 years. Like 18 months ago, our plan was a week ahead. Like now we are truly mapping out what 3 years from today, revenue wise, headcount wise, product wise, looks like for Morning Brew. And I think the partnership is forcing us to do that. Some areas that we talk about partnering together are everything from, you know, uh, our advertising business. How can we partner with Business Insider to sell larger, more holistic packages, getting in front of different but complementary audiences across all of our ecosystems, all the way to how can we leverage Business Insider's top of funnel of hundreds of millions of people, uniques on their website a month, to drive to be Morning Brew subscribers. And so those are some of the partnership conversations that we've been having.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, even just looking back at the past year as that was in the works, obviously it's been a really unique and challenging landscape. And like the pandemic has played such a huge role in that. And, over the past 12 calendar months, in 2020, how did the pandemic change your approach to marketing and selling ad space? And there was like
Yeah.
so much going on in this past year. And that has definitely affected our approach. What does that look like on your side?
Yeah, so what I will first say is that I think 2020 was a year, but it was like 10 years in leadership training and management training. I have my own podcast called Founders Journal, which I'm spending a lot of time building up. And the episode I recorded last night was kind of like my lessons in crisis leadership. And I thought it was a timely one given obviously the everything that happened at the Capitol literally 2 days ago. Just when we thought the craziness of 2020 was gone, it's become the 13-month year. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about lessons from the last year and a half of, even though I'm a first time founder, that I've had to just understand how to lead a company during crisis and during tumult. And a few examples of crises that have happened with our own business are what happened at the Capitol, the acquisition with Insider, because anytime an acquisition happens, it's obviously going to cause questions for everyone in the company. To the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, and everything around the BLM movement, communicating to our organization during that. And I think it was honestly, it was a year that made, as a leader, every leader grow up and become better at navigating their company and communicating. As it relates to our advertising business, we ended up finishing out the year hitting our exact goal that we wanted to hit that we stated in December of 2019 prior to knowing about the pandemic. So things ended up working out in a really good way. But to say that we weren't affected by the pandemic would be a lie, especially in March or April. March or April was an absolute shit show in the sense that like I had never experienced what like panic and fear did to an ad business. And there was a period of 72 hours where ad dollars literally just like vanished. Like we went from being in a very good spot to, I vividly remember it was like March 15th. It was when we left the city. We were all going to go to remote work. And at like 9 p.m. the night before, a big sponsor was supposed to do a full takeover in our newsletter. That was probably, I can't remember. It was a, multi 5-figure deal. They pulled out, and they pulled out of that deal. That was the first. And then just, that was the first shoe to drop. And then these dominoes continued of partners just saying, we have no idea what's happening in the world right now. We don't know what this coronavirus is, but it's scary. Like we don't have a choice but to put our marketing budgets on hold. We're literally doing nothing. We're just freezing everything. And there was a period of a week to a week and a half where Austin and I were like, this is wild. What are we going to do? Just make sure we can pay our people. That is not because it got that bad, but because the momentum of ad dollars leaving the door got Austin and I'd be like, we've never seen momentum like this before. And so Austin and I were having conversations about like every possible way that we could monetize Morning Brew's audience outside of advertising, from starting a Patreon to, partnering with universities on selling courses to literally coming out with like merch and swag and selling swag. Things started to normalize in late April, but between middle of March and middle of April, it was it definitely aged founders and managers.
Yeah, that the environment last spring in the marketing space, every day was such a question mark of what would things look like in the ad landscape. What would happen with digital. It was totally agree. It was a wild time, and I think you touched on something really important, which is like the responsibility that founders, CEOs have internally to their own employees, and that's, I think, being there for those people has been such a even more heightened responsibility this year than in previous years. And one thing on my own personal experience with Morning Brew has been amazing experiences working with people on the team. And when you think
Awesome
about,
to hear.
yeah, absolutely. And when you think about the team that you've cultivated this year in one of the most challenging years, and probably a lot of hard conversations to be had with your team, what has that kind of looked like? And when you think about growing a team and hiring during these types of advertising environments,
Yeah.
what has that experience been?
Yeah, it's again, it's been a learning experience, and just to share a few of the lessons that I've had, and again, this is what I talked about in Founders Journal, and I'd encourage anyone to just go and listen to it because I won't do the whole episode justice. But basically, the first thing was like not going into hiding. Like I think the worst thing that a leader or a manager can do during a time of crisis or concern is not say anything, is to, and especially in a remote environment where you're not in an office, where your team doesn't see you, to not be present on Slack or Zoom or email. Like I think the reason it's so bad is because employees will look at the environment and they'll be like, okay, crazy stuff is going down. Is our business going to be okay? Are there going to be layoffs? And imagine if you look to your manager or you look to your leader and you hear nothing. Like you hear no statement in Slack, you hear nothing in all hands, and you continue to have to wonder for yourself. I think it sends the message to team members that like you're on your own, figure it out for yourself. And I also think generally, like we as human beings are story making machines. When there isn't information, like when we don't know all the information, we fill in the information with what we want to fill it in with. And I think that leads to just like a lot of momentum of potentially not true narratives. So I would say the first thing was like not going into hiding, showing our team we were present. That goes into the second thing, which is like being humble, at least as a young founder. I think it was so important early on to not come off as someone who has had like hundreds of reps at this. And I think early on with any of these crises, saying to our team, like, we are going to do our very best to push the company forward, to communicate to our team. And we want to be clear, there are going to be points where we mess up in the decisions we make. And all we can promise is to do what we believe is right by this company and the right thing as people. And I think that's such an important thing to just disarm people and connect with them, because I truly believe unless you're like, like Dara, who runs Uber and who's run several companies, it's impossible to manage crises perfectly. And so I think disarming people or letting people know that you're trying your best and you're going to make mistakes gives you the permission not to want to make mistakes, but when you do make them, you at least have told people that you're not perfect. So I think that's another big one. And the final thing I'll say is customizing care. Like being a leader or being a manager is like being a doctor. Imagine if you treated every patient with the exact same diagnosis and the exact same bedside manner. Every employee enjoys being communicated to in a certain way. Every employee has different levels of just like, confidence and questions and the need to be reassured. And so I'd say the other thing is finding ways to communicate in a scalable way with everyone at the company level, but then finding ways to prioritize speaking to the people who will benefit most from being spoken to in a one-on-one manner, in a way that you can customize your care.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, being a first time founder and a young founder, and probably the growth and the experiences you've had over this year have been so pivotal. But when you look back to like 5 years or 5 and 3/4 years ago when Brew first started, is there one thing that you know now about running a business that you absolutely wish you could have told yourself 5 years ago?
Uh, the biggest thing that I would say is being like, be great at thinking about the second order effects of your decisions. I think as young founders, young professionals, it is so easy to think about a decision based on what you know now and whether that decision makes sense or not. And I think what I've found is the best leaders that I've ever spoken to are thinking 4 steps ahead. So, I'll give you an example. Like, if we're thinking about, say, hiring, uh, I'll give you an example. We're working on hiring a director of social right now at Morning Brew. The easy decision to make, or the I would say the way I used to think about it is saying, okay, Morning Brew, we want to build up our brand social account. So we want to build up our Instagram account. We want to build up a Twitter account. We probably are going to want to launch a TikTok, and saying, okay, for that, to do that job, who is the best person to hire? We'll probably end up picking someone who is maybe in, their mid to late 20s, has managed 1 or 2 people managing accounts, and that's it. And the issue is if I don't take it a step further and say, okay, great, but what about a year from now? What about 2 years from now? What about when Morning Brew has 4 or 5 multimedia products? What about when not only do we have those multimedia products, but those multimedia products have personalities also? So like Alex has his podcast, Kinsey has her podcast, and we have 4 other personalities. Who's going to need to be the director of social that is managing the social accounts for 8 shows, 3 Morning Brew branded accounts, and 8 personalities? And is it that the same person that will be running the team when we have 2 or 3 accounts? And most of the time, the answer is no. And I think in the early days, we wouldn't think about it that way. And so we would hire someone who is right today and maybe for the next 3 to 6 months, but not maybe right for a year to 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm. And you've actually spoken on before, like really the importance of hiring and like how bad hires have that trickle down effect. Can you speak on that a little bit here? And in building a
Yeah.
what does it look like to bring on people that think those 4 steps ahead about the brand and the product?
Yeah, so I mean, if I didn't just share that lesson around like thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, the second lesson I would share is that you can't spend too much time thinking about people, like thinking about the right way to hire people, thinking about the roles you need to hire for, thinking about how you develop people and retain them. Like, I just don't think as a leader you can spend too much time on that. And I think the biggest thing we learned in making mishires is it generally came down to 2 things. Actually, sorry, 3 things. Hiring someone too quickly, where basically what happens is we run a hiring process. We go through 2 months or 3 months of the process. It doesn't work out. So we have to restart the hiring process. And we find someone who's pretty good 2 weeks into that new process. Because we're like mentally exhausted for looking for someone for this role for 3 months or for 2 months, we end up pulling the trigger on hiring that person. Every time that behavior has existed for us, we have made the wrong decision. And honestly, it ends up leading to that person no longer being at the company 6 or 8 months in the future. And it's not only not fair to ourselves, it's not fair to the people that we mishire. I would say the second thing is hiring anyone we know. Every time we have had any friends or friends of friends in the business, it has not worked out ever, like ever, ever. And the other thing that I would say is taking basically a bunch of things that need to get done in the company now, where like you're talking to your current team members and you have, one person who's saying, these three things, I want them to get done, but they're not exactly my job description, but they should get done. And then having another person say the same thing. And you basically find like a list of 9 things that need to get done. You mash those into a role that you hire for. And what you end up realizing is you hire someone to do 9 things that were never a top priority. So there was probably a reason you didn't hire someone to do that. So those are the 3 big learnings I've had from hiring. And I would say the other big thing is no one fires fast enough. It is human beings hate tension. Human beings strive to be empathetic and good people. And I think that is the antithesis of what needs to be done when you realize someone's not right for a role. And by the way, when I realize someone is not right for a role, it takes me far too long to let someone go also. Like it is a very tough thing to do. But if I could give one piece of advice to everyone, including myself, it would be like, let people go in the most humane and empathetic way, but as fast as possible, because I believe you're doing a disservice to your company and to the person. Once you get to the point that you feel like you've given every chance for someone to succeed in a role and it's just not going to happen, they're not the right person. To me, what happens is, one, it's not right for the company because things won't be pushed forward as fast as they should be. And also, people, like, if you think someone's not right for the role, you're never going to be the only one. Other people in the company will have the same exact thoughts. And the longer you keep that person, other people will question why is management keeping someone who we don't think is effective enough in the role. So I think one, hurts the credibility you have with your team. But I think the second is it's a disservice to the person that you ultimately are going to let go. Because if you don't think they're going to grow in the company, you're literally slowing down their ability to progress in their career because you know that they're not going to be able to escalate in your company.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And we absolutely here at the Fool have had such a focus for a really long time on really being committed to like being detail oriented with that hiring process, thinking about it long term, because we always say our people are our most valuable asset.
Yep, 100%.
And I wanna close us out today with one last question for you, since we're at time. And in thinking ahead to if you're on Motley Fool Live in January 2022, and we are looking back, how are you going to measure success this year?
If I had to encapsulate it in like one analogy, it's if I did the same exercise today and I did the same exercise a year from now or even 2 years from now, what it would be is I would go to downtown Manhattan. I would randomly pick 10 people and I would ask them, do you know what Morning Brew is? And my view is that probably right now, given if you're in downtown Manhattan, you're probably close to the financial district. So you're already talking to like a pretty concentrated audience of people who probably know what the brew is. My guess is 7 out of 10 people would say they know what it is. And then if I ask those 7 people, what is Morning Brew? I think the answer right now would look pretty different for everyone. I think some people would say, it's the business version of the Skim. Some people would say, oh, it's that business newsletter. Some people would say, oh, it's, that collection of newsletters. And a small group would say, oh, it's that business media company that does newsletters, it does podcasts, and it's huge on Twitter now. If I do the same exercise at this point next year, my view is that, first of all, instead of 7 out of 10 people saying that they know what Morning Brew is, it's 9 out of 10. And that the majority of the group says what the minority had said in the previous example, which is Morning Brew is synonymous with the word business. When I think of a business media brand that services the modern business leader in all places that the modern business leader consumes content, that's who Morning Brew is. To me, if we can see those results, literally conducting that study and see that story evolve, it means that we have executed on a product plan and a branding around that product to evolve the story. Because you can't evolve the story without evolving the product in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to be excited to check in with you on that next year. And my team, especially, is really thrilled to continue growing our digital partnership with Morning Brew. Um,
Totally.
Absolutely. That is all the questions we had for you, Alex. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Motley Fool Live and share with our members. We're so appreciative to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super appreciative of so many people at the Fool that I've spoken with just casually, and super appreciative for your guys' partnership and excited for what both companies are going to build over the coming years. So thanks so much, and hope everyone has a great weekend.